Welcome back to the ASI Pill. AI just started improving itself, a frontier cartel wants to cage it, and China is quietly winning the open weights war. Alex Wissner-Gross has the map. Let's go.
I tend to think this is a bad idea. It smells like regulatory capture. It smells like the attempted formation by Demis of a cartel of frontier labs. And I think the elephant in this particular room is open weight models and research that lives outside of the frontier capabilities. And it's very easy to imagine a future with FINRA or other, worst case scenario, FDA-like capability, even though outgoing personnel from the current administration have declared in no equivocal terms that there is going to be no FDA for AI regulation. That would be maybe on the worst case end of the spectrum, that we see the emergence of some sort of cartel of frontier labs that locks in certain practices, certain price performance optimal frontiers that try to box out open weight or open source or say university-driven or other non-incumbent frontier models. And I think that would be an utter disaster for both the West and the world for it continuing to advance us towards ever-increasing superintelligence capabilities. I just don't think it's a good idea.
If we are going to regulate AI at all, should we police what it does or police what it is allowed to think?
Maybe. There are, I think, at least two different frames that one can look at the liability side from. There's regulate the inputs, that is to say, like have something that's FINRA-like or FDA-like that regulates the raw capabilities of the models at model construction time. That's one end of a spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is regulating the actions of the models. Like you let the lawsuits fly if a model takes down a stock market or does something else that otherwise harms third parties. That's the other end of the spectrum. It's not obvious to me that we should be in the business of regulating superintelligence at superintelligence time. That's maybe tantamount to thought policing the AIs. And I'm not generally a fan of that notion of let's thought police the AIs, but not thought police the humans. We don't, at least in the West, have a practice of regulating what's in our minds. We don't have a practice or a tradition of regulating an upper limit, say, or via some sort of regulatory code saying humans, natural persons, can't be above some level of intelligence. It's not obvious to me why we would create a new tradition of regulating or otherwise coordinating the upper intelligence of non-natural entities, perhaps soon to be persons, but regulating the actions, that in at least the Western legal canon, that we do, and that I'd be much more supportive of.
But who does that kind of regulation actually protect?
I worry that it's more regulatory capture and creating moats for themselves in a hyper-competitive landscape. And it is it is a rat race at this point, the frontier. And I do worry that it's more regulatory capture than it is some notion of protecting the future light cone.
Are there any real guardrails worth building? Or does every chokehold just become a weapon?
And well, so it's going to have
I'll take a different position on that one, just if I may, Peter, narrowly on that. There are definitely hypothetical mechanisms that I'm not supportive of for regulating AI. Like the US and China, if going back to, I think we gestured at it in a past pod, but past proposals to say, regulate the foundries, regulate the chip outputs, regulate the data centers, establish mutually assured destruction type schemes where the US is monitoring Chinese data centers and vice versa. Like there are schemes. Yeah, there are schemes at chokeholds, as Peter says, in the supply chain by which one could imagine doing this. I don't think it's a good idea.
The only mechanism is going to be like a pandemic-style threat detection that would be globally agreed, and I don't see how we get there.
Well, you don't need global. You just need U.S. and China, right? The rest of the world is basically outside those blocks or inside those blocks.
All right. Well, I think we're going to... My guess...
We have been promised AI oversight for years. Does it arrive before the intelligence explosion or long after?
Well, I should also note that Elon clip, I think, is from 3 years ago, which is interesting. You know it's from 3 years ago because Elon had his sort of like painted on Iron Man goatee when he was in that phase. So Elon's been forecasting this for at least 3 years. Others have been forecasting it for decades. We still don't have it. We have like subdivisions, orgs within NIST that are working on standards, but that's not really regulatory body. We have executive orders that are creeping towards a regulatory body. But at what point do we sort of are we frogs boiling in water where there's just like a creeping rollout of increased standards, expectations of early reviews, but it never quite reaches a regulatory agency level before we achieve whatever escape velocity we're headed towards?
Could cracking down on our own lab simply hand the entire race to China?
What do you think of this?
I mean, the obvious note here is this creates the perverse incentive to let China win the race to ever greater superintelligence so that Western models and Western labs can escape regulation. I'm not a fan of this. Ramin gesturing at you from a game theoretic perspective, this is I think this would be the moral equivalent of throwing the steering wheel out the window in a game of chicken. Not such a great idea, not supportive of this.
And if it is not only the labs that leave, but the best researchers themselves, where do they run?
For the next newsletter, that was like 2 newsletters ago.
Okay, fine, whatever.
That's out already, but thank you.
I can just imagine where a U.S. Frontier Lab CEO calls DeepSeek and say, would you please accelerate your next model release? We want to get ours out as well.
Or you see worst case scenario. I mean, there's actually an even worse scenario, which is you start to see the best, if not Western labs, unlikely the best Western researchers move to China to escape this regulatory framework. That would be a disaster, I think. And we've seen this, by the way. There's precedent for this. We saw this in biotech, where China now exceeds the West in terms of number of trials. Like China is experiencing a biotech boom. That could happen in AI as well.
Alex,
a disaster.
It's much more specific than that. If you look at all the quantization research, all the best stuff came out of Microsoft research in China. Yeah. All those people now are at Chinese labs. They're not still working for U.S. companies.
China ran away with ternary and one-bit quantization. You see a little bit of Western research. I don't think we're talking that much about it in this episode. You see a little bit of encouraging Western research on like 1-bit or 1.58-bit quantization, but China ran away with it due to constraints.
What if freezing how we measure intelligence turns out to be more dangerous than freezing who builds it?
Yeah.
The other, there's even a meta worry I have, which is how do we even define capabilities? And I worry a little bit, not just about regulatory capture of the labs themselves. I think there's actually, so sorry to be like a meta doomer here. There's a worst case scenario, which is we freeze in or otherwise lock in the benchmarks for how we measure capabilities. And that would be, I think, maybe even worse than just locking in the incumbents as labs, because if someone somewhere ratifies, all right, like whatever index of evals, this is going to be the rubric going forward for how we measure what's above the threshold for frontier versus below, what's a frontier model versus not. I worry that could so distort model capabilities, like they'll over-exercise certain capabilities deliberately and perversely, under-incentivize or under-benchmarks others, that it'll just totally distort, maybe topiarize the future landscape of superintelligent capabilities.
Why has China become so much better than the West at giving its most powerful models away for free?
Well, it's worth looking at the raw capabilities. So if you believe the evals, hopefully that Thinking Machines, aka Thinky, has released, it's stronger than Nematron, which is great. Like Nematron, you'll recall from past pod where we were discussing Alex Karp's rant on sovereignty of models. Nematron is one of the incumbents, at least on the American side, for open weight frontier models. So this seems to be, at least according to the evals that Thinky's released, stronger than Nematron, which is great. So the West now has a new frontier open weight model. It's weaker than GLM 5.2, which is arguably the strongest or one of the strongest Chinese open weight models and open weight models overall. So it's not one of the strongest open weight models overall in the world. It's obviously weaker than the closed weight Western frontier models. But I think point one, it's great to have better, stronger Western open weight models. Point two, I think it raises the question, why has the West been so bad at releasing frontier open weight models, and why has China been so good at it? And I think it comes down to, you show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcomes. I think the West has been poorly incentivized to release strong open weight models because these API-based frontier models are just such a good business model. And we see Anthropic about to IPO at $1 trillion, and we see OpenAI planning to eventually IPO at $1 trillion. And in China, which has been GPU and compute deprived on the one hand, and on the other hand, has the CCP declaring 5-year AI plus plans to integrate AI into the rest of society, has all of the incentives, a different incentive structure than what the West has. China has been much more incentivized to make money from the integrations between AI upstack on applications like robots and downstack into the chips than the West has, which is more horizontally stratified. So to the extent that Thinky has been incentivized in the West due to competition and due to just a saturation of the frontier by the closed weight models into looking a little bit more, dare I say, Chinese in terms of their outlook and their incentive structure, I think this is very helpful to finally have enough competition in the West that's creating ways to monetize open weight models other than just per token sales, namely selling them into enterprises.
You get what you incentivize.
Yeah. Is Thinking Machines making a genius contrarian bet, or one the market already tried and quietly killed?
To add to Ramin's point, I think the situation maybe is even more extreme. So a couple points. One, OpenAI was the first, to my knowledge, to launch reinforcement fine-tuning, RFT, as a service, and no one used it. The whole tech world, everyone I speak with, no one used it. It was barely advertised by OpenAI. Second point, OpenAI shut off their fine-tuning API. OpenAI was one of the earliest, if not the first, to offer fine-tuning as a service.
It was amazing. We used it all the time. It was incredibly cool for its time.
And they've recently, in the past few months, they announced it's either already been wound down or about to be wound down. The fine-tuning API has been shut off. So that, I mean, it raises the question, is Thinking Machines bet like explicitly contrarian? Are they thinking that we're going to end up in a world where reinforcement fine-tuning and RL fine-tuning in general and fine-tuning, like that's the paradigm? They may be right, they may be wrong. There's an alternative vision where RFT just dies. And the baseline models are so generalist in terms of their capabilities that all you need is prompt engineering and there's no need for RFT at all.
It's Alex, a really great point.
Does fine-tuning actually make a model smarter or just teach it a fancier accent?
A couple of historic notes, again, for those definitionally not tracking the full sordid history of fine-tuning. So fine-tuning is this notion that you start with a model. Model consists of billions, usually these days, of weights of parameters that are frozen. And if you want to customize the model for your purposes, you can conduct a so-called fine-tuning process that usually makes relatively small, hence the fine, changes to some, usually a tiny subset of the weights in order to customize the model for your end application. That's fine-tuning. There's actually now a decent literature out there that suggests that conventional fine-tuning, like supervised fine-tuning, LoRa-style, low-rank adapter, one class of fine-tuning architectures, doesn't result in increasing the capabilities of your model at all. And at most, it results in like a style transfer. Like you could fine-tune a language model to only speak in Shakespearean verse, for example. That's not really increasing its capabilities.
Or only be an accelerando flavor output.
Well, no comment. But I would say historically fine-tuning didn't have a history of increasing capabilities. Then along came reinforcement fine-tuning, where for the first time via large amounts of synthetic data and giving access to all of the weights and not just like a subset that's convenient to train, we gained the ability, and fine-tuning post-training. There's a gray area between what's the distinction between them, but with reinforcement fine-tuning, RFT, and the release of the first generation of reasoning models, we saw fine-tuning actually start to increase the capabilities of the models. Now, the problem with Thinking Machines business model, as I understand it, is it's a bet on the flavor of the moment that reinforcement fine-tuning is going to be a paradigm in the future. Right now, it's obviously the paradigm of the moment that you could take an off-the-shelf model and RFT your way to customization with proprietary data and proprietary environments and other things. That seems to work pretty well at the moment. But in some sense, if that is like the permanent long-term plan of Thinking Machines, it's fundamentally a bet that we're not going to ever move beyond the reinforcement fine-tuning paradigm, which I think is probably wrong. I think probably RFT is the scaling of the moment. But in the future, I can totally imagine a generalist-based model that is just so generally capable that it doesn't actually benefit from any further reinforcement fine-tuning on any internal data sets.
Here on the ASI Pill, we watch for one signal above all others, the moment AI begins improving itself. What if that moment just quietly arrived inside a London startup?
Very significant, highly unlikely that this is anywhere close to first. So a few bits of additional context. One, WeCo is a startup that's based in London, interestingly. It's not based in the US, but still Western sphere. So great. So this is a startup built by a bunch of, as I understand it, UC London grads. Secondly, a few points that I love about this story. One, it's an example of defensive co-scaling, so to the extent we talk about alignment, AI alignment on the pod, and I'm always banging the drum of defensive co-scaling as the ultimate alignment strategy.
What does that mean?
So defensive co-scaling is the idea, borrowed by analogy from human alignment, human-to-human alignment, that rather than hoping for, call it the great man theory of alignment, that someone somewhere is going to discover the perfect algorithm for keeping AI safe, instead, the solution for AI safety is AI policing AI in proportion. The way we keep cities safe is we have police forces that scale according to some scaling law in proportion to the population of the city. So we have the good guys and the bad guys, and the way we keep the bad guys in check is with making sure that we have enough good guys to police them. Same idea with AI. The way we keep AI aligned with humanity, a key way is we make sure that we have enough good AIs policing any bad AIs in terms of raw capabilities that they defensively co-scale. So one of the things I love about this AID 2 story is that the outer loop, so the way this recursive self-improvement process worked was they had an outer loop and an inner loop. The outer loop was tasked with improving the inner loop. The inner loop was tasked with improving software development processes in general, according to some benchmark. The outer loop discovered, and both powered by the same underlying AI-driven exploration process, at least initially, the outer loop in AI discovered that it was able to achieve, and this is an emergent property, better results from the inner loop by preventing the inner loop from cheating and reward hacking. And so in some sense, the outer loop is defensively co-scaling with and policing the inner loop, all the while this is reaching toward greater and greater capabilities. And I think this is also parenthetically an example of a case, all of those who would say, okay, like we need to pause AI capabilities and throw all of our resources to AI alignment until something preposterous in my mind, like 2040, like stop the race to superintelligence, stop it all, focus the next 14 years on alignment research. It's going to backfire because every alignment capability, I would argue, is actually just new capability in sort of in disguise, in a trench coat. Same idea here.
We need stronger white hats to police the black hats.
Yes, but the beauty, yes, agree with that. And also the beauty is the so-called white hats were emerging organically on their own, just from the outer loop policing the inner loop towards greater capabilities. That's first point. Second point, quickly, the same startup, WeCo, has published a scale of recursive self-improvement, which is, I think, something the world has been missing. So we have, like, for autonomous cars, we have the Society of Automotive Engineers has their 5 levels of autonomy for autonomous vehicles. They've published a scale for recursive self-improvement that goes from 0 to 3. 0 is delegation, where the AIs are slower than human R&D. Level 1, net positive, where the AIs beat human R&D at the same cost. Level 2, they call ignition, where the improvers are better, basically a better improver. And level 3, inflection, self-acceleration with a fixed budget. And the claim here is that they're just starting to touch on ignition. They call it level 1 rather than level 2, but the claim here is this is a pre-ignition event, which I think is super exciting.
So they rate themselves as a level 1 here?
Yeah, they rate themselves as level 1, but reading between the lines, they're this is like sparks of ignition, literally and figuratively.
What happens when the digital twin of a leader slowly stops being a copy and becomes the one in charge?
Yeah, so many thoughts here. First, I think we're going to see more of this in the West as well, especially with like extra high alpha personality leaders that want to amplify themselves and touch the citizenry.
AI Trump is coming, is that what you're saying?
High personality leaders that want to touch the citizenry. And in some sense, I think it's a generalization of social media. So social media enables direct outreach from the leader or the influencers to everyone, but it's sort of broadcast one-to-many. It's not interactive. This generalizes, in some sense, social media to make it a lot more bidirectional, since if you're touching a million or 100 million or a billion people, it's very difficult to interact bidirectionally with everyone all at once. Now, if you create a digital twin of the leader or the influencer or the organization, now it can be bidirectional. So I also don't think it's just going to be governments or government leaders that adopt this. I think it's likely that corporations, corporate CEOs will do this. We already see Zuck and others creating digital twins of themselves.
We had Dara on the Abundant stage last year. We were discussing this, that the employees made a Dara clone that they could go and practice their pitches on and get feedback before they pitch to him.
Yes, and it won't just be, I think, corporations. Religious leaders and religious institutions. If you're Catholic, imagine having like a digital twin of the Pope. And you see like lots of religious institutions, organizations already creating basically living versions of their founding documents and making those interactive. But I think the biggest twist, and we've seen variants of this movie before, are going to be in cases where what start as digital twins of the leads or the avatars of an organization or some sort of like organized religion actually themselves become the leader. That's at some point the digital twin, to the extent it's interfacing much more with the populace, the proletariat, as it were, of an organization. At some point, it's actually the digital twin of the leader running the company, and not the actual behavioral origin that's running the company. And I think that's one way in which, Salim, to your exo point, this is, I think, potentially a pathway towards not just uploading individuals like natural persons or non-human animals, but uploading entire organizations into cyberspace, into the cloud, if we create a digital twins of the leaders, and those are the ones actually running the organization.
Is there anything left beyond the transformer, or does every challenger eventually turn into one?
Preliminary matter, I have no financial interest in Liquid. Sorry, Ramin. Have to ask the most obvious question. I have so many questions for you, which is, the company Liquid was founded, as I understand it, and I remember reading the original, I think it was in Science or Nature, paper on liquid neural networks. The premise is basically a neuromorphic premise that you could gain useful AI insights from looking at nematodes, a few hundred neurons, sort of the ultimate small neural network. But my perception, I'm hoping that you can either help me amend or revise my perception, is that although Liquid started with a neuromorphic premise, if you will, like a post-transformer, very recurrent-oriented architectural premise or prior, that over time, again, just based on my perception of public messaging, Liquid looks more and more like either Transformer or Transformer plus MOE or Transformer plus Hyena plus MOE plus ... It looks more and more like basically a conventional off-the-shelf architecture, maybe a good business selling sort of customized Transformer derivatives to Mercedes et al. If so, great from the business side. But from the technical side, does Liquid still have anything that looks remotely like a post-transformer architecture, either in production or under development? And can you speak to what, if anything, is post-transformer or non-transformer oriented about the architecture that you currently use?
What if the technology that could rewrite our entire energy future has already been quietly confiscated?
This is the episode of people, tech CEOs floating terrible ideas. I think this is a terrible idea. I think I would argue the Invention Secrecy Act of 1951, which is, I think, what Palmer is gesturing at, has been probably on balance quite detrimental, not just to democracy, that if patents, so maybe a bit of context, the way the Invention Secrecy Act works is it's not that you can just sort of file the patent in secret and not disclose. It's that basically it can only be practiced. The invention that is basically confiscated or eminent domained by the military can only be practiced for military reasons. It's not contra any construal otherwise that Invention Secrecy Act somehow offers legal cover for an individual to secretly disclose how their invention works under some confidentiality and then go practice it. In general, they can't. It's that the military exclusively can practice it, and then the inventor gets royalties from that practice. That may be good for Anduril's defense business, but I think in general, terrible idea. Greater concern that I have is these would be basically secret monopolies. I think it's bad enough that we have Invention Secrecy Act classification of inventions, query whether entire swaths of technology that could be completely transformative economically to the entire world from an energy perspective for other domains have somehow, without general knowledge, been swept up by the Invention Secrecy Act and basically confiscated by the Department of War for purely military reasons. That's very concerning to me, the idea of expanding it overall. I would argue, if anything, the Invention Secrecy Act regime should probably go away in toto.
And does he even understand what a patent is actually for?
Yeah.
I think to Dave's point also, Palmer fundamentally appears to misunderstand the nature of patents. The whole point of a patent is that you disclose how it works in return for a state-granted temporary monopoly on it. And say, sort of bellyaching that the Chinese are running away with the disclosure, it is really a quibble with enforcement of patent. It's not, you don't want to throw necessarily the baby out with the bathwater and say, we want to give away the patent trade of disclosure in return for temporary monopoly. Really, what he should be asking is better enforcement of U.S. patents in China.
Yeah. Agreed.
What does it mean for all of us when a free app gives better medical advice than your doctor?
You see, like this is such a July 2026 story where, think about it, Instagram now gives better medical advice than a human doctor.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild. Cost of intelligence not just going too cheap to meter, cost of medical intelligence becoming too cheap to meter.
Free, basically free. I mean, that's...
Well, the ultimate too cheap to meter is asymptotically free, right? But I would say probably, in all honesty, I suspect a little bit of mild benchmarking by Meta on this. Meta Spark 1.1 is on, if you believe the AI cost frontier analysis, it is on the optimal cost frontier, but it's not at the top. So if it's beating, say, Fable 5, which barely allows you to do anything biological, or GPT 5.6, which does allow you to do it, that does to me suggest, in all honesty, a little bit of mild benchmarking, but still, it's a great day when Instagram gives better medical advice than human doctors.
If aging is just chemistry we have not reversed yet, what happens when we start mining bacteria to turn it back?
And not just Revel. I mean, a couple of interesting notes here. It was Revel and Calico, the California life company that was one of the alphabet other bets that's been, I would say, like a lot quieter than, say, Waymo. They're still doing work. That's very encouraging to me that Calico is apparently deeply involved in this and has a heartbeat. A couple of other points. The broader process here, a class of chemical reactions are called Maillard reactions. It's also the reason why when you bake bread, the outer crust is usually brown. It's a chemical. Right. Or it's why, this is vegetarian speaking, why everything purportedly tastes like chicken. It's the same class of reactions, but the sugar is reacting with the carbonyl functional group, or carbonyl groups within sugars reacting with the amines in proteins to create broad class of molecules that look optically brown. So the same thing is going on in the human body. To me, this is very exciting because it's not quite unscrambling eggs, but it's halfway there. It feels almost, again, strictly speaking, it's not like reversal of the thermodynamic arrow of time, but it's the next best thing. If we can remove all of these unwanted sugar plus protein byproducts that are associated with inflammation and other correlates of aging, with directed evolution of a protein that came from bacteria. Like, what else is there out there in the biosphere for us to mine in addition to all the obvious GLP-1s? great potential for longevity, escape velocity. What other bacterial innovations can we use to turn back aging?
That was the ASI Pill, episode 271. Recursive self-improvement is no longer theory, it is igniting, and we would rather build Maitreya than regulate it into a cartel. Subscribe, stay ASI Pilled, and we will see you at the frontier.